Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we are joined by one of the most accomplished musicians in jazz today. This gentleman has been on the scene for over 50 years and has worked with many greats from Buddy Rich to Cannonball Adderley, Thelonious Monk, Frank Zappa, the Rolling Stones, Earth, Wind and Fire, Patrice Rushen, Steely Dan, and Kurt Elling, to name a few. He is a two-time Grammy award-winning saxophonist, and to date, he's been on over 500 recordings and is still going strong. Please welcome to Jazz Talk, the legendary Mr. Ernie Watts. How are you, sir?
Great, Preston. How are you?
Good, man. It's really, really good to see you. Thanks for being on Jazz Talk today. I wanted to jump into this and talk a little bit about your background and your humble beginnings. And I understand that you were born in Norfolk, Virginia.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also, I was moved to Detroit, Michigan as an infant.
Mm-hmm.
And my father got a job for working for Chrysler in Detroit.
Okay.
And so we went there, and I was there as a small child. And then we moved to Wilmington, Delaware when I was about 11 or 12.
11 or
There's,
12.
there's a sign on the screen here that I can't see your face because it's telling me this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant.
We will just say got it, and that will go away,
Okay.
dear.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Yay! There you are.
Well, man, one of the things that I found
That's
interesting.
Now there's
another
an
thing.
ad.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
now
yeah.
there's,
Now there's an ad.
Okay.
so how do we get rid of that?
I'm not showing anything. When this records, it's not going to show up at all. Because when I'm seeing, I can
Oh,
see everything and it's not showing up at all as we're doing the interview. So you're good.
he
I
can't see
can't
you.
I can't see you.
Can't
That's
see
all.
me. Okay.
Now it's saying pro tip and Handel's Messiah and all this
Yeah,
unhelpful
so
stuff, but
now, yeah, let me make sure we can get you. I can see you so that I feel like I'm having a conversation.
Okay.
Then we'll.
Now, one of the things, Ernie, that I was very impressed with, now you started playing, I guess, saxophone right around 13. Now, I read a story that you were going to school or something like that, helping a friend out in Wilmington or going to like band or something like that. And I guess he wanted to play the saxophone. How did you end up playing saxophone?
Well, we were at the school on lunch break. It was at the beginning of a semester, and
Hmm.
I was always interested in art. I was big in the art department. He wanted to see about taking up the saxophone. He wanted to go and get an instrument, so I just joined him on the lunch break. So
Wow.
we went to the music department, and he got a tenor saxophone. He wanted to get a saxophone. And then the teacher asked me, well, what instrument would you like to play? And I had no idea, right? So I said, well, I think I'd like to try trombone. Probably because I'd seen the Glenn Miller story or something like that on
Yeah.
TV the week before, right? So the trombone looked like it would be fun. And this music department was all out of trombones, so the teacher gave me a baritone saxophone because I was tall for my age, and he figured I'd be able to carry it in marching band.
Yeah.
So that's how. So it was that kind of a thing. That's how I started on the saxophone. It was one of those. It was one of those freaky happenings.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I liked it. I liked playing. I started studying at the school, and I started learning how to play myself, practicing at home. I've always been a practicer. I started practicing then. And the very first book I had was called A Tune a Day. And it was this little book that had pictures of a person's hand, and then the notes, the fingers you put down to get the note. So that's the very first place where I started. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, and then after I'd been playing the baritone
and you had classical.
for about 4 months, 3 months, the school got an alto saxophone, and I was allowed to start playing the alto saxophone. I think the teacher realized that I had been carrying the baritone back and forth to school every day. You know, I had the baritone in my right hand and my books and stuff in my left hand. And I
Mhm.
think the teacher had started to realize that my right arm was about 3 inches longer than my left arm.
Yeah.
Baritone is big, you know. So I was dragging it back and forth every day. So when the school got the alto, I started playing alto.
Yeah.
And that's
Interesting.
how
That
I
yeah.
started up in alto.
One of the things that I found quite fascinating is that you developed really fast, Ernie. I think what by the time 3 years later, at age 16, you were playing professionally.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I never thought about it, but you know, when I look back on it, it was pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you know, it's pretty amazing to me now.
Hmm.
Uh, I was studying in school, and the
Classical.
school didn't have a jazz department.
Right.
So I was studying the classical repertoire for saxophone, and so I started playing uh, through the classical repertoire, you know, the Rubank books and the regular books that kids learn to play music in.
Right.
Uh, they recognized that I was serious about it. You know, my teachers did. So I started studying privately. Excuse me. I started studying privately at the Wilmington Music School in Wilmington, Delaware, where I started playing. And I started studying with a guy named Harley Hastings, who
Hmm.
was the clarinet teacher there. They didn't have a saxophone teacher, it was all classical. So I
Right.
started studying saxophone with him, and he started teaching me the repertoire for classical saxophone. So my background was always a combination of classical technique and theory and playing also by ear. You know, at the same time I was studying classical saxophone, I started listening to jazz records. In Wilmington, you know, quite a bit like Baltimore. You know, I grew up in a row house,
Hmm.
so my neighbor was a jazz fan, and he started listening to me practice. So what he did was start lending me jazz records. You know, the first jazz record I ever had that I listened to and could play with was a Dave Brubeck record called Jazz Goes to College.
Which we
And
studied.
I
Mm.
heard Paul Desmond.
Well, that's yeah.
Yeah, and he played so lyrically and he played so beautifully. I could copy his solos. I could play what he played from the record.
Hmm.
So at the same time I was learning classical technique and learning how to read, I was also learning how to play jazz intuitively from recordings. And then after I had been playing a while, my neighbor started taking me to concerts. In New Jersey and Pennsylvania and all over that part of the country at that time. When I was a kid, it was like 1960, 1958, 59, around then. There were all of these ballrooms in these in amusement parks. You know, he used to take me to this place called Riverview Park in New Jersey.
Hmm.
It was right off the Memorial Bridge. We go to the Hershey Park in Pennsylvania, and there was a ballroom there, and all of these places, and bands would come. And there would be these dances, like Count Basie would come, Duke Ellington would come, Stan Kenton, Maynard
Hmm.
Ferguson, Woody Herman. All of these bands, yeah, all of these bands would come on the weekends and play at these dance halls in the amusement parks. And
Right.
so the people came, they would dance, and all the people that were music people, we crowd up around the bandstand and we'd listen to the music and we'd listen to the bands and watch the people playing and that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot from my friend that took me around. His name was Alden Jenkins, and from my neighborhood, it just kind of grew into that sort of thing. So I was involved in listening and playing from the time I started at 13. So
Yeah.
by the time I was 16 or 17, I was playing classical repertoire and I was involved in, they used to have contests. They used to have classical contests where you'd go and play with your piano accompanist. Now, my teacher, this guy I mentioned before, Harley Hastings, he was a very good piano player. So he taught me these pieces, and I went around and started playing at these recital contests. And also after that, I started winning some of these contests, as a solo artist.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, the Wilmington Symphony Orchestra, which was made up of players from the Philadelphia Orchestra, because everything is so close there. So the Philadelphia Orchestra players would come to Wilmington and play in the Wilmington Orchestra also. And I played a very famous saxophone solo written by a French composer called, his name was Jacques Ibert, and it was called the Concertino da Camera. And
Hmm.
so that was a very, very famous piece for saxophone. So I performed that with them when I was about 16 or 17. And
That's
at the
incredible.
same time, I was learning how to play jazz
Yeah.
by ear. And my friend Alden, he was taking me to all these concerts. So he took me to the University of Delaware. This was like 1961, around then, to hear Cannonball's band. Now,
Mm.
this was the sextet, with Yusef Lateef and Louis Hayes
Hmm.
and Sam Jones and Joe Zawinul was playing piano, you
Yeah.
know. And so I heard Cannon then, and it was just a funny story. I mean, consciousness wise, I thought of myself as being a musician from the time I was 16. I just figured I was a musician, you
Right.
know. So my mother realized that. She realized that I was really into it. So Christmas, when I was about 14, right?
Columbia Record Taping Club, right? Columbia Record.
Yeah, she joined the Columbia Record Club,
Yeah.
and she got me this little record player from Sears, from Silvertone.
Right.
I had this little record player where you take the speaker off the front of it and set it on the other side of the table, and that made a stereo,
Right.
right? And my first personal jazz record was Miles Davis's Kind of Blue,
Ooh.
because that was the freebie at that time.
Yeah.
You join the Columbia record club, the first record you get is free. The
That's
first
right.
free record that year, because it was brand new, was Miles Davis Kind of Blue. So for jazz, for the jazz historians, they know that that was 1959.
Right.
Kind of Blue came out.
Yeah.
So that was my first jazz record. And I heard Coltrane and I was transfixed.
Wow.
Something really, I tell people it was like I stuck my finger in a light socket.
Yeah.
I was never the same again after I heard Coltrane.
Yeah. I've heard that story, Ernie, so many times. When people heard that record, then, when they heard A Love Supreme, it just went to a new level. Coltrane, where he just brought everyone, with him. But I wanted to ask you about Berkeley. You started going to Berkeley. You were there for a little bit, and I don't think you finished. And how did you get to work, with Buddy Rich? I guess while you were at Berkeley, some opportunities opened up for you to work with Buddy Rich.
Well, that's an interesting story too.
You won the downbeat
Uh,
scholarship
I
to get to Berkeley.
That's an interesting story too. Uh, what happened was I graduated from high school. I went to Westchester Music College in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
and it was called Westchester Teachers College at the time. Now it's Westchester University. I was there for a year, and it didn't really work out for me very well. My mother, this is the fear that people have about young people going into music. I told my
Right.
mother that I wanted to be a musician,
Hmm.
so she just about passed out, because everybody sees all of those terrible movies about the tragic heroes, the guys that end up in the gutter and all of that kind of stuff. And it makes great movies, but it's not necessarily true. There's all of these jazz musician movies, The Man with the Horn, all of these other things, and what Mo Better Blues, same thing. It's like these stories about jazz musicians that end up destroying their lives. You never tell you the story about people like Duke Ellington
Right.
that are great. They're successful. They're positive. They live a positive life. You always get these horrible terror stories about musicians, right? So I told my mother I was going to be a musician. She flipped out, so she said, well, maybe you should go to college first and get your teacher's degree so you have something to fall back on. So
Right.
I went to Westchester Teachers College for my mother for a year, and it wasn't working out for me. So I dropped out and I started teaching privately in some of the local schools in Wilmington. During that time, I auditioned for the Downbeat Scholarship that they had to
Hmm.
Berkeley. I won the saxophone award for that year. So that's how I got to Berkeley. I got to Berkeley on a scholarship.
Hmm.
Uh, I was at Berkeley for about a year and a half, and Buddy Rich came to Boston. He came and worked at a place called Lenny's on the Turnpike, and it was a jazz club in Boston, in the
Hmm.
Boston area. And Gene Quill, who was a great alto saxophonist. I don't know if you know about him. He was a fantastic alto player. He was buddies with Phil Woods, and they used to have a band called Phil and Quill.
Hmm.
But anyway, this is jazz history.
Right.
These guys were great bebop players. Gene Quill was with Buddy's band. He got into some kind of a tiff with Buddy, and he quit the band and went back to New York. So they had a hole in the saxophone section.
Mm.
So the manager of Buddy's band called Berkeley, and Phil Wilson had just left Woody Herman's band, and he was teaching trombone at Berkeley.
Hmm.
I was in Phil Wilson's band at Berkeley. And so when the manager of Buddy Rich's band called Phil and asked who he would recommend, Phil recommended me, right? So that's how I started with Buddy. And
Uh,
what they wanted was they wanted to get a student, they wanted to get somebody that could play the parts till they finished up in Boston at Lenny's on the Turnpike. Then the band was going to New York, and
mm.
they would get an adult. They would get a real saxophone player once they got
Hmm.
to New York. So I was just supposed to be there for a week to get the band to New York. And Buddy and I got along, and I started playing with the band, and I ended up staying for almost 2 years with Buddy.
Wow.
But that's how that started. And then I traveled all over the world with Buddy. I recorded 3 albums with him, and we ended up in LA. right? We ended up there in LA. We would work at a club called the Shea
Hmm.
and different places and go back and forth to LA. Well, Jackie Gleason, they used to have these TV variety shows that would take 13 weeks off in the summer. They would take their summer break. Uh, Jackie Gleason, who was very, very popular then, he took his summer break and we did a summer replacement show for Jackie Gleason called the Away We Go show,
Away we go,
because
show.
his little phrase that he used to
Yeah,
say, he used to always say that at the beginning of his show.
right.
It was Buddy Rich, Buddy Greco, and George Carlin was the
Oh, the
comedian.
comedian George Carlin. Yeah.
Right. And we did that show for 13 weeks.
Mm,
How I got to LA. After I
interesting.
left Buddy's band, uh, instead of moving to New York, I moved to LA.
Moved to LA.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask you, Ernie, how'd you get to work with the late great Oliver Nelson? Of course, his name rings true. He so many TV shows, scores and movies that he did. But how'd you guys get to work together? And I think out of that collaboration, you ended up working with Thelonious Monk as well. But I'm
Right.
interested in knowing about that.
Oliver was the main arranger for Verve Records, Prestige Records,
Hmm.
and he did everything in New York. He was an incredible guy.
Yeah.
He did all of these things for we were just listening to a Jimmy Smith record last night. It's
Really?
one of my favorite ones. It's Peter and the Wolf,
Only with
Uh,
Jimmy.
and it's Jimmy Smith, but it's all the Tchaikovsky arrangements, the sound, the woodwind sounds, and all of these things that Oliver did,
hmm
and he incorporated it into this blues thing that he wrote for Jimmy Smith, and it was ridiculous. We love it. So
Yeah.
we were listening to that last night.
Wow.
In 1968, I moved to LA. In 1969, Oliver moved from New York to LA. Oliver had a band in LA. I used to play with his big band, uh, and all of the great players that
Yeah.
that that came from New York were coming at that time. People don't remember, like, there was a whole thing for a period of time with jazz scores for TV shows. And
Hmm.
it happened because of Peter Gunn, right? Henry Mancini
Every
wrote
man singing.
a score for Peter Gunn. It would turn out to be a giant hit for TV, and they started having all of these TV shows that were detective shows that had jazz scores. So
Hmm.
they had Oliver come out to write some jazz scores for some of these detective shows. And that's when I met Oliver. That's when I started playing with Oliver. And other players came out too. Jerome Richardson, he was a great player. And I met all of these people and I started working with Oliver.
Mm.
We did a 3-month tour of Africa.
Yeah.
Oliver and the small band that was the Blues and the Abstract Truth
Oh,
Size
that's a
band.
classic. Everyone knows that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I met Oliver, and we started playing, and we did all kinds of recordings. We did the Monk Project, and we
Hmm.
did some concerts at the we did some concerts at the festival up in Monterey with Monk.
Hmm.
We also did during that time. We did. I played with I played with Oliver with James Brown. Right.
Wow.
We did, but we did a thing with James Brown with Louis Belson's band. It was
Oh wow.
Louis Belson's band. Oliver wrote all the charts. It was James Brown singing standards, and it's called Soul on Top. If you ever get a chance to find this thing, it's just great. It's like he's singing. James is singing, if I rule the world, and then he goes,
Right.
huh, hit me. You know. It was great. And so
Beautiful.
we did a lot of things together.
That's beautiful, man. What was it like working with Thelonious Monk? I guess the one time or whatever you got to record with him. What was it like working with
It
Monk?
was one of his last recordings,
Yeah.
and he was very quiet, but he was very on it, and he played beautifully. And we talked a little bit, he was very, very, very what would you say, kind,
Yeah.
very kind guy. And he was doing his thing. Tio Macero
Yeah.
produced that, and it's called Monk's Blues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
did all of those. We did all of his tunes with Oliver. Oliver wrote all those charts,
Yeah.
and so
Oliver was
it
a
was
genius,
it was
man.
really good.
Tell me about Frank Zappa. I've always been interested in, you working with Frank. That's well known throughout your illustrious career. That's one of the first things that people bring up. Tell me about working with Zappa. What was that like?
Well, I met him in the studio. I was working in the studio next door to where he was working, so we met like in the hallway and started talking.
Yeah.
Uh, and he wanted to do some jazz things at that time. He was interested in doing some jazz things, so he was putting together some music at night. He always worked at night. I mean, we'd go in at it like after 11 p.m. and do our recording and stuff. And
Mm,
George Duke played, and John Guerin, who was a great player, played, and uh, and he was working on new music. Uh,
yeah.
we did that. We did also an album called King Kong, which was Jean-Luc Ponty's very first solo album, and I
Hmm.
think that was done during that same period of time. Then I was involved in the orchestral. He did a lot of orchestral music with the Los Angeles Philharmonic and Zuba
Right.
Hill. He did a very well-known album called The Grand Wazoo, and that had a story to it. And there's a cartoon of a saxophone player on the album cover of Grand Wazoo, who's supposed to be the Grand Wazoo, and that's a caricature of me. And and then the instrument was supposed to be the mystery horn, and it was a saxophone, but it was a C melody saxophone. It's a saxophone in a different key, it's in the key of C.
Yeah.
I played that on it because he wanted something freaky. So I played that. I played that on the Grand Wazoo, and
Right.
that's what the picture is. This little caricature, this cartoon that's on the cover of the record.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of different things. He wanted me to go on the road. I couldn't go on the road because I was so busy doing other things. I would have loved to have done that.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I'm sad that I didn't get to do, but I couldn't do it economically. And now I think about it, and I should have just said, "Hey," and done it.
Yeah.
Uh, when I got back from Africa with Oliver, I was asked to join the Tonight Show band. Uh, During that period of time, there was a period when the Tonight Show band would come from New York to LA for 2 weeks at a time, maybe three times a year.
Yeah.
Uh, my whole life is a parade of little miracles.
Hmm.
Uh, when I came to, or big miracles, when I first came to LA in 1968, they had staff orchestras at NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, all of the big movie studios. They had staff orchestras of 80 musicians that worked 40-hour weeks. They were regular gigs. You know, if you were in the Fox orchestra, you would go and it would be some giant film, and it would be these different things. Or if you were on staff at NBC, you'd go to NBC and it would be it would be a big show,
Yeah.
uh, Red Skelton or something like that, or many different shows. So at that particular point, they had these staff orchestras. In 1969, there was a great saxophonist on staff at NBC named Gabe Baltazar.
Hmm.
He's Hawaiian. He was asked to come back to Hawaii and be the leader of the Royal Hawaiian Band. They
Okay.
had a hole in the band. Okay.
Mhm.
I was asked to go on staff at NBC for the last 2 years that they had staff orchestras in LA. I started doing staff. I started doing, different shows. I did the Dean Martin show. I did a bunch of different shows at NBC. Tony, Orlando, and Don. You wouldn't
Yeah.
believe
Oh, I remember all of those shows, man, coming up.
all of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
You
Now
know,
as far as the Tonight Show, you were on there with Doc Severinsen for about 20 years, wasn't it?
20 years from
Yeah.
1971 to 91.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I did that. And during that time, a lot of different things happened that I wasn't able to do. Quincy got a thing that he was going to do with Duke. I couldn't do that because it was at the time that the Tonight Show was just being organized and set up, and I
Right.
wasn't allowed to send a substitute.
Yeah.
Also, we got back from Africa with Oliver, and Oliver recorded that band, and he did an album in LA called Sound Pieces,
Sound
and I wasn't
pieces.
able to do that because we were just getting set up at NBC.
Yeah.
Uh, if it had been like 6 months later, I would have been able to send a sub, but it was that kind of timing. So there were some things I wasn't able to do at that time, but then, that's the way those kind of things go.
Now, Ernie, wasn't that you? Speaking of NBC, wasn't that you on that sax solo for Sanford and Son?
I did Sanford and Son.
Yeah.
I did Starsky and Hutch. I did Night Court.
You also did WKRP in Cincinnati, didn't you?
I did that.
Yeah.
I did all of those titles. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And
incredible.
I did a Richard Pryor movie called The Toy.
Yeah. Remember the toy?
That I did 24 hours. I did another 24 hours. I did the Fabulous Baker Boys. I mean, a whole bunch of films.
And that's incredible. Someone that I wanted to ask you about, probably my all-time favorite band. You worked with Earth, Wind, and Fire on their classic "That's the Way of the World," one of the great recordings. What was it like working with Maurice White and Charles Stepney, man?
That was fun. Everybody, all of the people that I worked with were really into what they were doing. They were
Yeah,
serious about their music, and it was really great music, and it was always done very, very well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was some good stuff. Yeah, they're like one of my favorite bands, and you work with them. You also,
Great.
so,
Stepney was a great arranger.
You know, it's funny you said that, Ernie. I was talking to a few people that knew him, and even Verdine of Earth, Wind, and Fire said that had he lived, he said he was like neck and neck with Quincy Jones. He said he was a genius, but he died so young. And of course, he discovered the Rotary Connection as well as Minnie Riperton's famous album, Come to My Garden. But yeah, I hear a lot of good stuff about him.
He died very young, and Jerry Hay took his place right
Right.
after Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah.
We
Because
did
you were on that
all
follow up
the horn
album.
section. We did all the horn section
Yeah.
stuff until they brought their horn section out from Chicago after a while.
Because you were also on that follow after they did That's the Way of the World. You were on Denise's album, This Is Nisi.
Right.
I think that was one of the last recordings that Charles Stepney was on, but when he passed in '76. But that's also a really good recording. Yeah, really good stuff. Tell me, man, about working with. Well, actually, I wanted to bring this person's name up because you have a long history with this individual. You guys go back, and I think you're always called on first when this individual, once a sax player, is your good friend Patrice Rushen. Tell me about how you guys met and came to work together, because it seems like a great marriage between the two of you. You know.
Uh, I taught. I did a master class at her high school. She went
Hmm.
to Rock High School. She
Right.
was in high school at the time. Indugu Chancellor was there at the same time.
They're
Uh,
good friends.
and we were all good. We were all good friends. Reggie Andrews
Yep.
was the teacher at Locke, and
Hmm.
he had a great program, and everybody wanted to come and be in his music program. So
Yeah.
I went over there to Locke to do a master class, and that's when I met Patrice. I met Patrice when she was in high school. Yeah.
You guys have been working together, man, for so many years. It's just good to
Yeah.
see you guys together performing. And she always has great stuff to say about you. I've had her on the show like 3 times already, and yeah, she's something else. Now, I wanted to ask you about I guess the record label that you and your wife formed. Was it Flying Dolphins? Tell me about that. Was that as a result of just having creative control over what you're doing? And because you guys did that back in 2004 or 5 when you started that label. Tell me about that.
Right, 2004. We did it because we wanted to do the music that we wanted to do
Yeah.
in the way we wanted to do it, you know. So I had been writing, I had been working on things. I have a group here. I had a group in Europe.
You still do.
And so we still do that. You know, we're getting ready, hopefully, to go back to Europe in April and
Good.
start doing some concerts again.
Yeah.
So that's why we started it, was because there was so much music that I wanted to do, and I had a vision of it, and I wanted to do it in the way that I wanted to do it. So we started it ourselves because of that. And we
Yeah.
funded it ourselves, and we did all of the work on it because we wanted it to be something that we had control of, something that we didn't have to get funding from somebody else to do. And then you get funding from other people, and then they have suggestions about things that they would like you to do. And sometimes you don't always agree, you know.
Yeah. And also another person, I think we talked about it a little bit last week when I spoke with you guys, a great vocalist, probably one of the best singers in jazz, is your friend Kurt Elling. You guys got a chance to work together, and you got a Grammy on Dedicated to You with him and Lawrence Hopgood. What was it like working with Kurt on that?
Oh, well, you know, he's my brother, you know, he's
Yeah.
like a great guy. I met Kurt and Lawrence when they were first getting started. It was their very first European tour, and I met them. It's so funny. I met them in Nice. And
Hmm.
I was over there with Charlie Hayden. We were doing
Oh,
a festival over there because I worked
yeah.
with Charlie for 20 years too, 25 years.
Yeah.
We did a lot of recordings together. And so I was on the way back to the hotel, and they had a shuttle bus, right? So I go to the shuttle stop, and there's Lawrence and Kurt, and I didn't know them, and we started just talking, and we started talking about the music business and talking about how to get started and how to do different things, and
Hmm.
that's how we got to know each other, from just talking about things, and you know, insights about the music business and working and production and all of that. And then we started working.
Yeah,
We started working on Dedicated to You, and we did a lot of touring. We worked together for about 2.5 years.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, man. That's
And it's
beautiful.
not over. I think we'll be
Yeah.
doing some things again too.
Oh, that'll be great. That'll be great to see you guys do something else in the future. Also, wanted to ask you about drummer that you worked with, and we spoke about Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, earlier. I'm sure that must have been a big thing for you to work with Jimmy Cobb, the late Jimmy Cobb. You got a chance to work with him too.
Yeah.
What was it like working with Jimmy?
I did an album, and it was called Classic Moods, and we did
Mhm.
a lot of the tunes that he did with Miles, and then we did some things at the Blue Note in New York, or no, at Birdland in New York, and he was always great. We did some stuff with Nat Adderley too, because after Cannon died, Nat had his group for quite a while, and we did a big band project concert in Florida with
Mhm.
Nat, and Cobb played with that too. And so it was always fun working with him. He always knew what to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Roy McCurdy's like that too. He always knows what to do.
I
Some
remember you.
don't even
Yeah,
have to talk. You don't even have to talk about music. It's just
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's
it's
just yeah, exactly.
right.
Also, I was reading somewhere you were telling a story. I think you were working with Pat Metheny at the time, and I think you guys were sharing the stage with what Sunra and Miles Davis or something like that.
Yeah, we
Um,
did a tour. We did a tour of Japan called Live Under the Sky.
yeah.
It was Pat's group with Charlie Hayden playing bass and Paul Where to Go on drums, and Sun Ra's band was also on that program, and so was Miles. Yeah.
Wow. I'm sure you were soaking it all in, Ernie, huh?
Hmm?
I'm sure you were soaking it all in, listening to that, especially Sunra. He's an interesting guy, man. Interesting guy. You know.
Yeah, that was something. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
lots of interesting things.
I wanted to do something in this next segment with you. I'm going to name some musicians. I'm sure some have influenced you, and there's no right or wrong answer. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind. I'm going to name some sax players, and just say whatever comes to your mind. The first name I'm going to mention is Chu Berry.
Okay, well, I think that he was one of the older players, and he was a teacher of Dexter Gordon. Dexter came out of Chewberry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next name, Ben Webster.
Okay, Ben Webster was with Duke's band, and he played he was a beautiful ballad player. The first time I heard Joe Zawinul, he did an album with Ben Webster called Soulmates. Have you ever
Hmm.
heard that?
Yes, I have that. I have it on CD.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's incredible.
yeah.
It's beautiful. You
That's a
know,
classic. That is a classic. Yeah, you speak of Ben Webster and his ballads, man. That's what he's known for. Next name, Coleman Hawkins.
right. Coleman Hawkins was like he was like very evolved. He came through different styles of music, and
Yeah.
he was the first tenor saxophone stand out front soloist. Before him, all the soloists were trumpet players and clarinet players. He played the first solo standout version of Body and Soul.
Yeah.
That's that's the classic, you know. And then from that point on, he created a space, a feature space for tenor saxophone soloists.
Yeah, yeah. Next name,
That was
Craig
1930.
Lester Young.
Yeah, that was 1935. Yeah.
So
So
next
that's
name, Lester Young.
Lester Young had the sound. You know, he revolutionized the sound of the saxophone. Uh,
Hmm.
coming coming before Lester, it was Coleman, and it was a sturdier sound. You know,
Hmm.
Lester had a lighter sound, and there's a whole school of saxophone players that came out of Lester, alto players and tenor players.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
yeah, he created a lighter way of playing the saxophone. That's where Stan Getz comes out of.
Hmm.
That's where Lee
Clement.
Cummins came out of.
Hmm.
You know, Warren Marsh came out of that. All of these guys, you know, um, Paul Desmond, they all came out of that perception that Lester had of the saxophone sound.
Yeah. Next name, Sonny Rollins.
Okay, Sonny Rollins was one or is one of the great bebop players, and Sonny Rollins is or was a contemporary with John Coltrane.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
those two hours.
yeah, and you know the legend, you know the legendary story of Sonny Rollins and Coltrane, right?
Yeah, yeah. Miles actually talked about it too in his book.
Right. It was, you know, he heard Coltrane, and he took a he took a break for 2 years, and he went to the Brooklyn Bridge
That's where he would practice. Yeah,
every day.
yeah,
And then he came back with his album after that. But
yeah.
Coltrane made a whole lot of people think differently about harmony, about playing the saxophone, you know.
Definitely.
And then I think that his album was called The Bridge.
Yes, it was.
That's right. I think that was like 1960 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere
Sonny
around in there.
Rollins when he came back, yeah, and
Yeah,
he did that with Jim Hall.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Next name, Joe Henderson.
Okay, Joe Henderson is he's kind of a bridge character for me too, because you hear a lot of Coltrane in his harmony,
Hmm.
but you hear a lot of Sonny in his sound.
Yeah,
You know, he comes out of Coltrane and Sonny sort of at the same time. And he's totally himself.
yeah.
Yeah, we did a lot of concerts with Joe's trio. When I was with Charlie, we did a tour called the Verve Jazz Tour, and it
Hmm.
was Quartet West, and it was Joe's trio, and it was a band that did this movie called Kansas City.
Oh yeah, I remember. I have that movie. That's from '95 or '96 or something like that.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was an all-star band,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I got to hear Joe every night, and that was really a lot of fun. You know, he got emphysema, so he began to lose the volume in his sound, but he never played loud. You know, I did some recordings with him for Milestones where I was in the section, and he played, and he had this way of playing where when he recorded, the sound sounded gigantic. But when he was actually playing in the room, it wasn't really that loud, but his sound recorded very well.
Yeah, yeah. Next
And
name, Wayne Shorter.
okay, Wayne practiced with Train. They used to hang out.
Hmm.
So he learned a lot from John. Uh, he is one of the great composers.
Yeah.
You know, the Miles band of the 60s, they called that Miles' second great band or his second classic band.
Hmm.
Wayne was the purpose in that. Wayne was the reason that band was what it was. He wrote the majority of those compositions. Wayne was also with Art Blakey in my favorite Art Blakey sextet, and he
Hmm.
was the music director with Art Blakey, and he wrote all of those incredible three horn arrangements for Art Blakey during the 60s. Some of the best stuff I ever heard. When
Yeah.
I was a kid growing up, they we used to go to New York on the weekends, and at Birdland they had a section called the Peanut Gallery, and you
Hmm.
could sit in this area that was roped off, and they didn't serve any alcohol, and we would go and listen to the groups there. And I went there one time, and it was Jerry Mulligan's band, full
Mm.
band, with Jerry Dodgen and Phil Woods and all of those great players. And then it was Art's band with Freddie Hubbard, Curtis Fuller, Wayne, uh, Jimmy Merritt, and Cedar Walton. It was the six-piece band. And it was the darndest thing I ever heard because Jerry Mulligan had a 16-piece band, and he would come on the stage, and they would play so soft, it kind of sounded like an organ.
Yeah.
Beautiful, you know, in that way. And then Art would come on with six guys, and he'd blow the roof off the place. It was unbelievable that energy. And that
Yeah.
was the first time I heard Freddie live. And then after that, I got to know Freddie, and I recorded a whole bunch of stuff with him in LA because he eventually moved to LA too. So I played a lot with Freddie. I knew Freddie very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Next name, Michael Brecker.
Okay, Michael was 4 years younger than me. Uh, his brother Randy, we're the same age.
Hmm.
Uh, I met Michael on a recording with Billy Cobham. We did some stuff with Billy, and we played together.
Hmm.
I met Randy in Atlantic City at a place called the Club Harlem.
Hmm.
There was a street in Atlantic City called Kentucky Avenue where it was like 52nd Street. It was all clubs, it was all showrooms, and it was this incredible place where musicians would work in the summer. There were all these summer jobs on the Jersey Shore. There were all these summer jobs when we were growing up. And you'd get a gig with an organ band, or you'd get a gig with a house band. I played lead alto in this house band that was called the Club Harlem.
Hmm.
It was like a Cotton Club thing. They had a dance line. They had uh, star acts. They had backup acts, and it was a big band. It's like the summers that I worked there. Sammy Davis worked there. Demita Joe worked there. Uh, uh, all of these great, great people. Slappy White was the comedian. There was all of this stuff,
Yeah.
continually. Dionne Warwick would come by, all of these people. So that's when I knew about Michael, from his brother. And then I met Michael later on with Billy,
Yeah.
and he's one of my favorite players,
Yeah.
and he was one of the great players. He had a lighter sound than Coltrane. We both came from that background. we
Right.
brought what we learned from that background. They grew up in Philadelphia. They were from Philadelphia. I was from Wilmington.
Yeah.
In the 60s, all of those guys were in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
Coltrane was in Philadelphia. All of those people came out of Philadelphia.
They're
The
Philly.
thing is, I was a generation after that. Michael was a generation after that.
Hmm.
So we got the next, generation of that energy.
And, I wanted to add one more sax player to that. I mean, there's a lot of guys I didn't cover from Archie Shepp. I mean, I can name a lot, but there's one special person that I put in the class with all those guys, and his name is Ernie Watts. I'm talking about you. You've had such an amazing, illustrious career. Love your playing, man. You've done so much to this music art form we call jazz. And I'm always looking forward to what you're going to do next. And I want to thank you today, man, for being on Jazz Talk today. It's been a pleasure to share this space and time with you. And thank you, Mrs. Patricia, too, for help putting all this together. Hang on, I'm about to close out the show. Don't hang up. Well, you've heard it from the great Ernie Watts. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.